Hey, welcome to another video in our Farm Your Yard series. I'm Carrie. Today we're going to talk about how to start your tomatoes for your vegetable gardens inside your house. So today we're going to talk about when to start them. We're going to talk about what you need. We're going to talk about how to start them, and then once they're growing, how to care for them. So let's get started. We're going to go over what you need to successfully start and grow your own tomatoes inside. So let's start from the beginning. So firstly, you're going to need some potting mix. This is just general all-purpose potting mix. You're going to need some containers to start the plants in. I saved these from a previous nursery trip. You're going to need the seeds. Here's a couple I got a couple seed packets. You're going to need water with a narrow little spout to water your young plants. You're going to need some type of marker and labeling system. This is a yogurt container that I cut, but you can also save plant labels from nurseries. And then you're going to need a heat source and lights. So this is where a lot of people get tripped up when they're starting seeds in their house. Most vegetables need a lot more light than houseplants do, which is why having a good grow light is really important. Here I've got two. Each are about 2,000 lumens, so together there's 4,000 lumens, and they're just T5 fluorescent lights. You can get these at a lot of nursery centers or online. This is a heat mat. I purchased this from Morgan County Seed, and it comes with a thermostat. And the thermostat is very important because if you didn't have it, the heat mat would just continue to run. The thermostat keeps it set at a temperature that you set it. I set this thermostat to about 75 degrees. And the thermostat comes with a little plug that you put into the soil, and that's how it tests how warm the young plants are. We need a tray to collect water. This is a lunch tray that I found. And then if you want something to keep humidity around the plants, this went over a cake that I bought. So now that you know what you need to get started, let's do some seed starting. So in mid-Missouri, early April is the best time to start tomato plants inside because they need about 6 weeks to 2 months to grow indoors before you transplant them outside when it's warm enough for them to be nice and happy and start growing really fast in your garden. So we have found that early April for us is the sweet spot. So what I'm going to do is fill up my trays or my little plant cells with just general all-purpose potting mix. There is some fertilizer in here that the plant will take up over the 6 to 8 weeks that it's growing in the potting mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take handfuls and just kind of toss it inside the 4 cells. And you see that I've overfilled it. I did that on purpose. So then I kind of shake it. I even kind of drop it a little bit to kind of settle it just a little bit. So you can see I really shrunk the pore space. So this should be good. I'm happy with this. Today I'm going to be starting some black cherry tomatoes. So this type is from Baker Creek Heirloom Seed, and it's a black cherry with some green stripes on it, so it should be kind of a funky little tomato. Seed germination is never 100%, so I'm not going to put 1 seed per cell. I think I'm going to do about 4 seeds per cell, and that way at most I can have 16 tomato plants growing out of here or in the early days, but if not, I'll still have at least 4, I'm hoping. So what I'm going to do is put my finger about halfway up the fingernail, my index fingernail, and kind of make 4 little holes per cell, about that deep. So something like that. Tomato seeds aren't very big, and the general rule of thumb is that you want to plant small seeds pretty near the surface of the soil because the seed doesn't have a lot of stored energy to break through a lot of soil. So we're not going to bury these very deep. So I'm going to sprinkle these seeds out onto my palm, and tomato seeds kind of have this fuzz on them. They're not very big. So I'm going to plop 1 little tiny seed per hole that I've made. If you get a couple seeds per hole, that's okay. All right, so I put seeds in all of my holes. Now what I'm going to do is cover up the holes with the potting mix that's kind of around the outside of the holes. So just kind of gently cover them so the seed's about covered about 1/4 of an inch. Just kind of pat it down, pat, 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 pat. And now I'm going to take my fingers and use all of my fingers to kind of pat the potting mix down a little more. If I do all of my fingers, it kind of distributes the weight a little more, and so I'm not like smashing it down. So I still am preserving those air pockets that are really important, but also achieving what we call good seed to soil contact, because roots like to grow in soil, not in a lot of air pockets. Nice, so I've got everything nice and patted down, and now we are ready to water. So when I've got young plants, I always water them with a really thin-tipped spout. So watering will also settle the potting mix a little bit the first time you water. So I'm expecting the potting mix level to settle down a little bit more. This first time I'm watering, I want to water all the way till the water starts to drain out of the bottom of the tray. So I'm just going to keep going until I achieve that. Alrighty. I can see the water starting to drain out the bottom, and now these are ready. But before I walk away and go do something else and forget about what I just did, it's really important to label. So I got my marker, I got my homemade labels, and I'm going to write black cherry on the label. Okay, so now I've got the label, and I'm just going to stick that into one of these cells. In 3 weeks, I'm going to remember that these are black cherry tomatoes. Now all of these need is specific heat and the light, and voila. So this is what the final setup will look like. I got my heat mat. I do have a piece of styrofoam just to keep it even a little more insulated, and then I have my water catchment tray, and then I have my tomato starts right here that are labeled, and then I have my thermostat, which is plugged into my heat mat, and the little probe is in the soil so that I can monitor the temperature of my plants. Tomatoes germinate best at like 75 to 85 degrees, so I'm trying to keep them at that temperature range until they germinate, which is usually about 5 days or so inside. So to try to help me get there, I'm going to use my humidity tent, my homemade humidity tent. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put that over the containers, and this will trap heat that's rising up from the heat mat and also keep it a little bit more humid and moist in there, which the young tomato starts like. I just want to make sure not to keep it too humid. So every day I'm going to take it and move it off just to give it some fresh air. All good gardeners know that the key to a good garden is just good observation. So checking on your seedlings at least every day is a really important thing. So when I check on my seedlings, what I'm going to do is I take off my humidity tent. I'm going to feel the soil with my fingers. I want the soil to be damp to the touch. I want to water them enough so that they stay continually moist, but not super soggy. I don't want them to be sitting in a tray of water all the time. So if I water them a whole bunch one day, I'm going to take them off the tray and then drain the tray. So now that I know that they're warm, because I can feel the heat from the heat mat, and I've given them a little bit of water, I'm going to check the thermostat. How's my thermostat doing? Well, they're 73.7 degrees, so that's, close to the ideal temperature range. Once I put my humidity dome back, it will probably go back up to 75 degrees, which is what I have the thermostat set for. It's been about 10 days since I've started these seeds, and you can see all of the activity that's gone on. You can see that there wasn't 100% germination, but I still got a pretty good amount of seedlings. I'm pretty happy with this. You might notice that I didn't have my humidity dome on. That's because I got worried that it was going to start smashing the young tomato plants. So I took it off once they got too tall. Once they started sprouting, another thing that I added to my daily maintenance, other than checking on the watering, checking to make sure the thermostat was still on, is I did a daily rotation. So every day I turned the little container that all the tomato seeds are started in. And doing that every single day keeps them growing straight up. So tomatoes love sunshine, and this setup isn't giving them as much light as they'd really prefer, but it works well enough if you rotate them every day. If you didn't rotate them every day, they would start growing towards the light and they'd be kind of growing in a misshapen way for the rest of their life. So just give them a little turn, a quarter turn every day, keeps them from doing that. Now that they're this size, I need to get them out of here and spread them out a little bit more so that they're nice and happy for the next 5 to 7 weeks that they're going to be living inside my house. Now we're at the stage that we call potting up. So that means we're going to take these little baby tomatoes and move them from this size container and put them individually in these size containers. So it's a little delicate of a mission, but they're resilient creatures, so we can do this. The reason why you pot them up so early on in their life is a tomato plant is a pretty large plant with a pretty extensive root system. And the deeper the root system goes, the healthier the plant is and the less you have to water it. So it's kind of behooves you as the gardener to have a really deep root system on your tomato plants. Now tomatoes are really interesting plants in that they have these little tiny hairs on their main stems, and anywhere that those hairs touch the soil, they'll turn into roots. So what we're going to do is not only are we going to give them each more space, we're also going to plant them deeper so that these little hairs right here all turn into roots, which helps facilitate our deeper root system. I'm going to fill up this 3-inch container about halfway with my potting mix. Same potting mix I used to start the tomato seeds in. Then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to kind of like hollow out the middle of that so it kind of spreads the potting mix up the side, and there's a hole now in the middle. This is kind of the tricky part. Gingerly tilt the tray with tomato seedlings. And I'm just trying to take one of these cells out. Voila! So you can see some of the tomato roots are growing down. They're nice and white, which is a good sign, meaning that they're nice and healthy. Since they're really young, they don't have a very extensive root system yet. They haven't really thrown out a lot of horizontal roots. A lot of them are just vertical. So this is a really easy time to separate them when they're growing so close together. And it is a good time to do it because it'll give them less transplant shock. They'll have less of a recovery time. So I'm just going to kind of pull them apart. You see how easy that is. So I'm going to set this one aside. Also, I'm going to pot this one up. I'm going to bury this tomato plant all the way up to where these two leaves are kind of branching off. So you're not going to see any stem. It's all going to be just two little leaves growing on top of some potting mix. Put some potting mix around it. And now I'm going to go back and kind of crumble some potting mix around the leaves of the tomato plant. Use my fingers and get the potting mix right up along that stem of that tomato plant so that I can get all of those hairs to turn into roots. And just like when I started the seeds, I'm just going to use my fingers to pat the soil mix down so that there's good soil contact along that stem so that the roots can grow nice and fast. Anytime you do anything that's stressful to a plant like what I just did, you want to water it, because wilting is like one of the easiest ways a plant tells you that it's stressed about something. And I don't want this guy to wilt. So I see the water coming out of the bottom, so that tells me I've watered the whole container, and that's good. I'm going to put my label back in. A lot of tomato plants, it's really hard to tell the difference in varieties until they start making tomatoes, and that's going to be a long time. And so now this tomato plant is going to live in this container until I transplant it out in my garden or in a container or in a raised bed. I will check on it every day, just like I checked on the tomatoes in these little cells. I'll touch it, make sure that it's nice and moist, make sure that it's warm enough in the 70s, make sure that's getting enough light. So now we've got our little tiny tomato plant in its nice big home on top of its heat pad under its grow lights. So I'm going to keep these grow lights on for about 12 to 14 hours a day. I turn it on in the morning and I turn it off at night before I go to bed. But I wanted to make sure it's nice and bright almost all day long, so it gets a lot of light. Flash forward another 7 to 10 days, and now my little tomato plant looks like this. It has 2 young true leaves. These first 2 leaves are called cotyledons, and so now it's got some true leaves and it's gotten a little bit taller. So it's definitely making some progress. I'm still checking it for water every day. I'm rotating it every day to make sure it's growing nice and straight. I'm keeping the lights on for 12 to 14 hours every day, and I'm making sure that it stays warm. And I will continue to monitor it every single day until it's ready to be hardened off and taken outside. So now you have seen about 3 weeks in the life cycle of a young tomato plant. We went from seeds to starting seeds to young seedlings to potting them up. Stay tuned for our upcoming tomato videos where we go over how to care for them throughout the gardening season. Please let us know if you have any questions about growing tomatoes in your own garden, and we'd love to incorporate that into the content that we are creating. But until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for joining us on Farm Your Yard.